100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free.
For a long, long time, I could not go in swimming until the YMCA was built, a Negro YMCA, and they had a swimming pool there.
The first effective federal law against discrimination in the sale and the rental of housing in the United States of America.
Martin Luther King Jr. envisioned a world where justice and compassion transcended boundaries. A beloved community where love and reconciliation triumph over hate and division. He laid the foundation for a dream. It continues to inspire actions of peace and service, still active today.
Evil begets evil, and love begets love. He felt that by being nonviolent, you're not fighting against your adversary. You are trying to promote that we believe in love, equality, and justice for everyone.
The 1950s and 60s were a time of great turmoil in the United States. Slavery had officially ended nearly 100 years earlier, yet its legacy lingered. Black Americans were denied basic civil rights and experienced blatant discrimination in education, housing, employment, and public accommodations. People began organizing to demand the freedoms guaranteed to them by the U.S. Constitution.
At that time, the Black Panther Party, you had CORE, you had Dr. King, you had Malcolm X. You know, the shoulders we stand on today. Not only that, you had Edna Griffin from Des Moines, Iowa. You had Judge Glanton.
The civil rights movement spread.
When you had to have a nationwide movement of a group of people to show up in almost every state because Black folks deserved the right to be heard, you knew that something had gone tremendously wrong.
Civil rights movement was the catalyst to us changing the game, not just to fit in, but to change the status quo. And that's what individuals fought for to do, and that's what we were trained to do.
From among the thousands of men and women who dedicated their lives to the cause, a unique voice stood out. A minister who spoke of meeting hate with love and advocated for nonviolent social change.
But the fact that Dr. King was jailed and still did not back down, he was not afraid.
In his life and his work as a leader of the American Civil Rights Movement, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was guided by his vision of the beloved community.
Dr. King believed in three evils: poverty, racism, and war. If we could eliminate poverty, that would be a catalyst for economic equality and fair employment. Every human being needs an adequate place to live.
From the time he emerged on the national stage as leader of the Montgomery bus boycott, to his final public speech in Memphis on April 3, 1968, in which he spoke of having been to the mountaintop and seen the promised land.
People have been utilizing his format and template and strategy for years since his passing, that he is an expert and a leader in how to create community and systemic change. And for him to champion a nonviolent protest is amazing and courageous.
At the historic March on Washington in 1963, an estimated 250,000 people heard Dr. King deliver his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. By the time he finished, the idea of civil rights protections for Black Americans seemed not only achievable, but inevitable.
The statements where he talked about America wrote a check, and it was a bad check. And when the people of color, the minimized community, especially Black people, went to cash the check, there were no funds in there. I think he identified the root cause. And that's one of the things that I took out of that speech. and took out of his life is that he went to the root causes and got away just from the symptoms. So it was more of the systemic change rather than cosmetic change.
The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a groundbreaking accomplishment, followed soon thereafter by the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In the mid-1960s, Dr. King turned his focus from social to economic justice, specifically the fight for fair housing. In 1966, Dr. King and his family moved from their home in Atlanta to the impoverished Chicago neighborhood of Lawndale.
His belief in everyone deserves housing, fair housing. That was one thing why he moved to Chicago and lived in rented a tenement that was really unacceptable housing for an individual. He wanted to put that on the forefront, that this is not adequate housing for anyone, and every individual or every human deserves acceptable housing.
King became co-leader of the Chicago Freedom Movement. The city at that time was one of the nation's most segregated. In his autobiography, King wrote of the emotional and environmental deprivation he witnessed every day among families trapped in poor neighborhoods, living in substandard housing, with their children attending substandard schools.
In the 60s, I was in my pre-teens, and I lived in the village of Arlington Heights, a northwest suburb of Chicago. So I actually saw some of these things that were occurring downtown. He was one of the leaders of that movement. That eventually resulted in the Fair Housing Act of 1968.
The Chicago Freedom Movement led marches, boycotts, and rallies. A gathering at Soldier Field drew 30,000 people to hear King speak of the need for housing justice. He kept up this advocacy for the remainder of his life. In April 1968, just 1 week after an assassin's bullet cut short the life of this remarkable man, the U.S. Congress honored his work with the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, outlawing discrimination in the buying, selling, or renting of a home.
The Fair Housing Act of 1968 provided the guidance for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to create the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity.
The state of Iowa is a community of people committed to remarkable change, welcoming new ideas and implementing them before the rest of the nation.
Iowa has always been progressive, having the black soldiers, that when no other state wanted to train black soldiers, we look at Iowa, desegregating schools before Brown versus the Board of Education. And we look at housing, that individuals identified needed to happen, the affordable housing, that, before even larger cities, larger states, looked at the housing.
The passing of the Iowa Civil Rights Act of 1965 was 3 years ahead of similar federal legislation. It outlawed discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, education, and credit considerations. The act created the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, an administrative agency that oversees enforcement of the law.
The Iowa Civil Rights Commission is responsible for investigating, mediating, and if need be, bring charges or assist in bringing charges against somebody for discrimination regarding housing specifically, but other issues also. In addition to that, they help train and educate and provide materials to 24 local or regional human and civil rights commissions across the state.
Here in Des Moines, as in the rest of the country, homelessness is on the rise. On any given night, more than 700 people in our city lack a place to call home. The problem of homelessness is multifaceted, and thus demands a multifaceted response.
A really important piece of our why in our community here locally is the supportive housing campus. And so truly the belief that everyone truly deserves a place to call home. In addition to our supportive housing campus, and that's really my role with the Y, we provide 140 permanent supportive housing units just on the edge of downtown for men and women who have had some sort of housing insecurity coming out of homelessness. So really providing them that first step of stable housing. We believe housing needs to come first and then community next. And that's where I think the larger why really plays that role.
The YMCA Supportive Housing Campus is one of several organizations standing in the gap by providing permanent supportive housing and wraparound services. Other nonprofit organizations, churches, the faith community, and city and county agencies all play a role in creating housing solutions that are safe, accessible, and affordable for all.
Housing is a right. It's not a privilege. And all the agencies working with homeless to keep that in mind and continue that good work.
And this takes all individuals that live in Polk County, not just a subset, not just the individuals who are passionate about this initiative or about civil rights. All of us have to come together as a coalition, as a team to make positive change in the community. And I think this is the great time and opportunity for that to happen.
Together we have the resources to ensure everyone has a place to call home. In unity, we have the opportunity to create the beloved community Dr. King spoke of.
We have to look at what housing really looks like. You know, even today, when you look at affordable housing, it still has a stigma to it, you know, a negative stigma to it. We have to begin to redefine what affordable housing is, redefine. And we have to get away from just, you know, teaching individuals how to rent. We have to begin teaching ownership, and that's part of that comprehensive plan. Because if I own something, I build that community. I feel part of it, of the community.
What's going on today, we're still dealing with the same issues that he fought for 50 years ago. It's just a different generation, a different time. And a lot of times we forget the past. But history always repeats itself. And from my point of view, history is now repeating itself with the same issues. Homelessness is increasing. People can't find a livable income or wage in order to find housing that they can fairly pay for. So we need to, as Dr. King tried to push, we need to find love for our fellow man in order to solve these problems.
Take this message as an opportunity to charge forward. And if you're doing it, keep up the good work. And we're so grateful and thankful for you. And if you're looking to get involved in something, this is my plea to you. Don't sit on the sideline. Let's use your talent to help us all.